start. I don't feel so good.
Hey, what's up? It's your boy Asian Psycho, aka ToeSniper98. I'm back a bit earlier than usual since I decided to just make this video on the spot a few days ago, and here it is. So let's get started on talking about everyone's favorite edgy literature character, Dante's. He's the game's very first Avenger, and an SSR Avenger at that. He debuted with the original Prison Tower event from last year, and he was regarded as one of the most useless SSRs for 2 years, until recently. Dante has 12,177 HP and 12,641 attack at level 90, and 13,340 HP and 13,838 attack at level 100. He's got very low star weight and star gen stats due to his Avenger class, 0.62% MP charge on attack, 6% MP charge on defense, a 7% death rate, and he's chaotic edgy, evil. Same difference. He's got a Lancer deck with a quick NP. His Buster cards hit 3 times, his Arts card hits twice, his Quick cards hit 4 times, and his Extra hits 5 times. Being the prototype guinea pig for Jalter, Dante shares her glass cannon aspect of having frighteningly low HP in exchange for a really high attack rating. In fact, only 4th behind Kintoki, which is even higher if you take into account the Avengers 1.1x class damage mod. But unlike Jalter, unfortunately, Dante's MP Gen and Star Gen are much different stories. He sacrifices the ability to generate MP charge reliably for decent overall Star Gen instead. With 1 Arts card and only 2 hits on it, and a pretty mediocre charge stat on its own, the only time Dante's can really build a lot of MP charge at once is if you have his MP generation skill active and or he gets crits on his Arts or Quick cards depending on the situation. I should mention that one of his passives does automatically give him 3% MP charge after every turn, which is nice, and if you can keep him alive long enough, it'll certainly make a difference, but this isn't something you should rely on for his MP charge. Just think of it as a little bit of free charge every turn, and just concentrate on manual charging instead. His Star Gen ability isn't actually too bad. He's got 2 4-hit Quick cards, and his extra attack has 5 hits on it, so if you get a Dante's Brave Chain with both of his Quick cards on it, then he can generate a handful of stars for you to use next turn. Don't forget that his 3rd skill is also a Star Gen skill, so that supplements his overall Star Gen quite nicely. I personally like to think of him as kind of a worse Okita, but with an additional instinct built in, so if you don't have any other reliable star generators, or if you just really want to feel like Dante's is somehow more viable than he really is in a game where Jalter exists, you can actually make him work as one, since Avengers have very low star weight and generally won't steal stars from anyone else. Nagito's first skill is Determination of Steel EX, which pierces Invul for 1 turn, increases his own attack by 30 to 50% for 1 turn, and increases his own debuff resist by 14 to 32% for 3 turns, all on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. You're mostly going to use this skill for its attack buff. The Invul Pierce and debuff resist effects are nice, and can certainly help in more niche situations, but for the most part this skill is basically a glorified monstrous strength that has slightly worse cooldown times. Maybe that's actually a good thing, since if this skill had any other really good effect on it like Evasion or Invul, Dante's would have the Jack or the Jalter problem of having its damage steroid tied to its survival skill. Wait, Dante's has no survival skill. Whoops! Instead, what he does have for a second skill is Golden Rule A, which increases his own MP generation rate by 20 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. This is his least impactful skill under normal circumstances. The times during which you'll get the most mileage out of it are crit based, since Dante's MP generation ability by itself is pretty shitty, and Golden Rule on its own isn't going to help it very much unless you manage to end up with like Dante's AQQ chain or something like that. This being said, it's a different story now, but we'll get into that later. His 3rd skill is Wisdom from Desperation A, which reduces one enemy's MP gauge by 1, removes his own debuffs, and generates 10 to 20 crit stars on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. This is a pretty straightforward skill actually. It just has 3 separate effects that are simple to understand, all clumped together into one neat little package. And no, I'm not going to make an Instinct meme here because I've memed about Instinct enough times already throughout all my videos. Because this skill isn't Instinct, it's... If you take a look at Dante's skill set, note that he's got a whole medley of effects for himself. He's got an Invul Pierce, a damage steroid, a debuff resist, an MP gen buff, a charge drain, a debuff clear, and a bit of instant star gen. Usually for any other servant up until his release, they'd only have like 1 or 2, maybe 3 of these effects in their whole kit. So his kit seems like DW wanted Dante's to be the kind of servant who's super geared towards challenge quests. This makes further sense if you take into consideration the fact that his debut event is basically a week's worth of challenge quests, so it wouldn't be too surprising if DW really did design Dante's just for his own event, and then didn't give a flying fuck what happened to him after. It's too bad they didn't think of giving him an Invade or Guts. His passive skills are Avenger A, which reduces his teammates' debuff resist by 10% and increases his own MP generation rate when taking damage by 20%, Ability and Correction B, which increases his own crit damage by 8%, and Self-Replenishment D, which auto-charges his MP gauge by 3% every turn after your turn is done. Usually I don't comment too much on passive skills since for the most part they're pretty run-of-the-mill, but similar to Jalter, but even more so, Edgelord's MP generation buff on hit is very important for his overall MP generation ability. Most of you have used Jalter in some capacity, so if you're observant enough, you've probably noticed just how much MP charge she gets after just taking a few hits. Dante's is even better at this because he generates 6% MP charge off every hit that he takes, which is the highest in the game, so if he's up against enemies that have multi-hitting moves, his MP generation rate goes through the fucking roof. But also keep in mind that unless you can consistently heal him, relying on enemy attacks to charge Dante's MP is really dangerous since he's made of paper mache and gets wrecked even by a single crit. At least he's not a berserker though. Sasuke's MP is Chidori, Emperor Chateau d'If, which hopefully isn't butchered like Jalter's MP line is. It probably is though. It's a quick AoE MP that deals 600 to 1000% damage and reduces all enemies' defenses by 20 to 40% for 3 turns and curses them for 500 to 1500 damage for 5 turns. He gets an MP buff next year for NA that increases his damage scaling to 800 to 1200% damage and gains an additional effect called Evil Curse that doubles all applied curse damage on them for 5 turns to match the overcharged curse effect. Other than it looking pretty fucking edgy as to be expected, Chateau isn't a remarkable MP, at least not before its buff. Because Dante's is an Avenger, he only has class advantage against Rulers and Zerkers, which means that for the most part, if you wanted to use him as a wave clear, you could probably find someone else better for the job, unless somehow he's literally the only AoE SSR you have. The 20% AoE defense debuff at Overcharge level 1 is pretty good though, so remember to lead off a multi-MP chain with Dante's MP so that the others can do more damage. Post-buff, if curse damage can stack like burn damage can, which I think it can in JP, I can see Dante's being able to cheese some battles with just raw curse stacking, but other than that, the damage scaling increase is what's more valuable as we'll discuss real soon. Okay, so we're now at the part of the video that made me want to make this whole video in the first place, and what you guys have also probably been waiting for if you're aware of what's going on in JP right now in regards to Dante's and whatnot. If you don't know what's going on, then now's a good time to fill you in. Last summer for JP's anniversary, DW released a certain servant named Skadi. As it turns out, she's pretty good, especially if you run 2 of her. Her first skill is a targetable 50% quick buff for 3 turns, and her third skill is a 50% targetable MP charge. Yeah, you do the math. It ain't that hard. Long story short, Skadi, and along with her Quick, is now the meta of choice for whales looking to clear shit fast, and Dante's is now at the forefront along with her. Before her, Dante's was more or less kind of like a trophy servant of sorts, because if you had Jalter, there wouldn't have been much of a reason to use Dante's. But he has just the right skill and the right MP type, so that when Skadi showed up and people started realizing the gimmick behind Double Skadi, Dante's got his ass dragged out of the gutter known as the bottom of the tier list, all the way up to the top apparently. The reason why DSS, as it's known in JP, is so powerful is because Dante's has a 100% quick buff that lasts for 3 turns, and he has his own MP generation buff in Golden Rules, so, if done properly, this means that Dante's can refund himself enough MP charge for the Skadis to give him the rest of the charge that he needs to loop for each wave past the first one. And since Dante's is an Avenger, he only has class disadvantage against Moon Cancers, and there are only 2 of them ever in the game, and how often do they show up outside of specific events and nodes? So in essence, this is a team that can obliterate just about most things in the game as far as farming's concerned.
A weapon to surpass Metal Gear.
And you don't even need to think about it, all you need to do is just be a Pepega and tap some buttons in the beginning to set Dante's up and give him Skadi charges as you go and you're Gucci. So why is this not as good as people hype it up to be? For starters, if you intend to put together your own DSS squad for the ultimate brain-dead Pepega farming team, an MP1 Dante's just won't cut it. Neither will an MP2. You have to start at least MP3 and probably post MP buff at that for your Dantes to even have a chance for the memes, and MP4 to be safe. The reason why you need to have your Dantes at such a high MP level is because of how FGO calculates MP generation. When a skill buffs a card type's performance, it's improving everything that the card type can do. So in this case, Double Skadi gives a 100% boost to quick card MP generation rates for 3 turns, along with star gen and damage. And similar to how damage buff stacking works, the same kind of mechanic applies to MP generation too. Card type buffs stack multiplicatively with raw MP generation buff skills, so Dante's golden rule stacks hard with double Skadi quick buffs. This is the same reason why the Surf Dread meme works. But that's not all. In order to truly reach the pinnacle of DSS potential, Dante's MP needs to do enough damage to overkill his targets for additional MP gain. The overkill mechanic in this game allows a servant to generate more MP charge and star gem for every hit that they make after the hit that takes the target down to 0 HP. Specifically, once overkill is triggered, every hit after that generates an extra 50% MP charge than they otherwise would have. So for Dante's, this mechanic is what allows him to be able to MP loop with double Skadi. This is also the same reason why the Surf Dread meme works so well as it does. However, this is a problem for him because as an Avenger, Dante's only has class advantage against Zerks and Rulers, and obviously for DSS to be considered the ultimate farming team, so to speak, you can't be just farming Zerks all the time, and you're not really going to fight Rulers under normal circumstances like farming, unless there's one in like an event node somewhere. As a result, he's going to do less damage than other servants who can properly counterclass, and thus isn't as likely to trigger overkill on mobs who have too much HP. Here's a neat little infograph on this mechanic, courtesy of Officer Artoria and friends, that breaks down the MP refunds that Dante's, Lancelot, and Parvati generate after using their MPs. Lancelot and Parvati are also here because, like Dante's, they're also suitable candidates for the double Skadi memes. The red bars, or the flat charge, indicates the amount of fixed NP charge that the servants can give themselves. Dante's Avenger passive gives him the 3% auto charge after every turn, hence 3%. Lancelot has no flat charge because there's nothing in his kit that gives him any additional charge, and Parvati has 10% due to her MP's overcharge. The base MP generation section refers to the amount of MP charge that the servants refund on their own without the overkill mechanic, and the overkill required section is the rest of the MP charge that they can only generate by hitting overkill. This means that Dante's needs the overkill MP gen bonus so that he can ensure enough refund for himself to keep the Skadi loops going. Maybe you're looking at the 2% and you're like, it's just 2%, not a big deal, should be easy peasy, right? But when you also consider what I mentioned before about how Dante's doesn't have class advantage against most enemies, and so it's much harder for him to be able to trigger overkill on enemies in the first place, you then realize just how important higher MP levels are for him for double Skadi looping to work for him. And, last but certainly not least, DSS requires a limit broken kaleidoscope, possibly even a super scope, which is whale speak for a level 100 scope, for it to be reliable. So how do you combat this problem? By far the easiest way to get around it is just to simply increase Dante's MP levels, since by doing that you're directly increasing his damage output. MP3 is regarded as the minimum MP level for reliable double Skadi memes, and MP4 just to be safe, and obviously even better if it's MP5. Dante's MP buff does also help out quite a bit since it increases his damage and thus helps triggering the overkill bonuses more likely, but even then you'll still need the MP levels to back it up. If you don't have at least an MP3 or MP4 Dante's, you're gonna have to plug in Waver so that he can try to make up for whatever charge Dante's is missing to keep looping his MP. But even then, depending on the node, Waver might not be enough either. Whatever way to use to make DSS work, it's always got some sort of whale requirement to pull off. Chances are, your average free-to-play or cheap-to-play isn't gonna have a Waver, a Skadi, and a Dante's, and almost certainly not an MP3 Dante's for that matter. You might be lucky enough to have rolled a scope, but given how rare they're supposed to be nowadays, I'm not gonna just assume that y'all have one either. So if you rolled Dante's, or tried to roll for him, or you plan to roll for him while his banner is still active at the moment, just for the sake of trying to do double Skadi Dante's memes, then just know that it's a perk that's unfortunately only truly viable to whales who don't mind diving for like MP5 SSRs or some shit. Thankfully, if you're bummed out by this, just know that there are great replacements for Dante's that are both much easier to get and pretty much do most of the same job anyway. Zerk, Lancelot, and Parvati are two of the biggest examples, as they both have their own MP generation buffs, which is required for double Skadi memes, though you'll have to get Lancelot's thirst skill to at least level 9 to make it viable, and perhaps the same for Parvati as well. Specifically, Lancelot by himself evidently can do almost anything Dante's can do when they're with double Skadi, so, in essence, DSS is just a luxury team that, while it's very powerful and possibly the most universal and brain-dead farming team that you could ever make, is not necessary and honestly too expensive for its value to your average FGO player. Outside of double Skadi, since she won't show up here in NA for another year and a half, Ed Boy isn't particularly noteworthy. Because he's been so tailored towards his own event, he's basically super scuffed in the things that he should be able to do, which are star gen and boss killing, and therefore other people can do his jobs better outside of his own event, especially now that we have an infinite supply of Grail burnt French toasts polluting both the all and extra support slots. But if you still want to make Dante's work, I recommend that you set him as your main DPS. Treat him as a slightly tankier but weaker berserker, like how I described Jalter, who can dish out consistent amounts of damage in case you're fighting nodes where there are a lot of different classes that you need to worry about, because with Dante's, you don't have to. You do need to babysit him quite heavily though, since he has no heal or survival skills of his own, but if anything, at least his animations are pretty cool, and they'll be even better in a year and a half. Or if you don't have Jack and you're a lazy free-to-play who doesn't believe in 3 stars, you can also legitimately try using Dante's as a star gen by concentrating on using his quick cards and his third skill for burst star generation. Like I just mentioned, you need to keep a close eye on Dante so that he doesn't get wrecked too fast or at the wrong moments. The things he's missing are a heal and a survival skill. I recommend that you cover him with the default Mystic Code because it's got 2 things that Dante's lacks, and supplement him with teammates who can also give him heals, additional MP charge, and damage buffs. Book Boy can cover most of these things except for the MP charge, though he won't be able to arts chain as much with Dante's due to his Lancer deck, and slap him in the face with the dictionary if he misses any of his buffs on his MP. Zipper Umu is also not bad since her buffs are all targetable and all quite strong for what they are. Nurse also wouldn't be too bad either, since her Buster buff would make Dante's Buster cards hit like fucking trucks, especially if they're crits. But then again, you'd need to worry about having to keep 2 glass cannons alive, which is obviously not ideal. You could even run Lolly Raiden or Assassin Hamster with Dante's for more chances at turning Dante's into a crit Avenger by just generating enough stars for everyone that star weight doesn't really matter too much by that point. Wavy Boy and Buster Boy are obvious choices here as well, as they always are, as is Skadi when she shows up next year. All you really need to do is make sure to keep Dante's alive, and that's all he could really ask for.
Life has many doors, Ed Boy!
The best practical CE for Ed, in my opinion, is probably a Starweight CE, so Seal Designation Enforcer may be a good option for him if you give him a Star Gen, or hell, just stack your frontline with double 2030s if you're whale enough. And I'm not sure if we have any Cs like this off the top of my head, but if we have any that boosts both Starweight and quick performance, use that too. Crit strength CEs like Atumbra, Holy Night Dinner, and Hot Carmilla also work here too, assuming you don't have to worry about Star Gen in the first place. Other than those, your standard CE options apply here as always, such as Imaginary Round, Holy Night Sign, Launch Order, Knights and Marines, Dumplings Over Flowers, etc. You could also use the free Heaven's Feel CE that we got as part of the movie promotion campaign, since it's both a 10% quick buff and a 40% starting charge CE, both of which Dante's can use very well. And of course, if you're looking for defensive options, Volumen. Eddie's own max bond CE is Chateau d'If, which increases party quick performance by 15% while he's got it equipped and is on the field. This is a really weird effect for him to have on his bond CE because other than his star gen, he has more or less no other party utility role, and given how edgy and selfish he is in this game, it would have probably made more sense if his bond CE had effects that only focused on himself. Still, if you're planning to use him in a more support star gen role, I guess, then his own max bouncy might not be totally useless, since it does still buff himself as well. My Chemical Romance is an unfortunate case of a prototype servant who got guinea-pigged and outclassed by his successor not even 3 months after his own release. In essence, GW got really excited with introducing Avengers into the game as a new class, and spent lots of time and energy building up Dante's character and story and whatnot, only to ditch his edgy ass for an edgy and big-titty alter waifu instead. Which I know some people don't mind at all. However, that doesn't mean that he's not at least fun to use, because everyone likes at least a little bit of angsty anime protagonist edge to spice things up. And he's since gotten a second lease at meta viability thanks to Skadi, and apparently now sits comfortably at the top of the meme list for what he's able to do with 2 of her backing him up. Wait and hope indeed. DSS might be a bit too expensive to be worth what they can offer, as viable, less expensive options for Skadi meming do exist out there for farming, but at least now he's out of the dumpster fire that is Danganronpa 4. I mean, the bottom of the tier list. And that's all you need to know about
laser beams!
Thanks for watching, and until next time, deuces.
But I could feel